Rome did not fear Caligula at first. It welcomed him like a miracle, the young son of Germanicus, the prince who promised to end years of suspicion and darkness. But within a few short years, that golden hope twisted into terror. Senators trembled, the treasury emptied, the emperor dressed like a god, and even his closest guards began to wonder if Rome could survive him. Before we go deeper into the rise and fall of the emperor who went mad with power, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy dark, mysterious history from the ancient world. After midnight, Rome does not sleep so much as listen. The city lies under a dark sky, its roofs and temple fronts washed in moonlight, its streets carrying the stale heat of stone, smoke, sweat, and fear. Somewhere beyond the Palatine Hill, dogs bark in the alleys, a cart creaks over uneven paving, and the Tiber moves through the darkness with the slow patience of something older than empire. But inside the imperial palace, the night feels different. Here, lamps burn behind guarded doors. Servants walk softly. Senators speak in lowered voices when they must speak at all. The marble corridors hold the scent of oil, incense, damp wool, and polished metal, and every footstep seems to know it may be overheard. At the centre of it all is a young man not yet 30, ruler of the known Roman world, master of armies, judge of aristocrats, keeper of life and death, and increasingly, in the eyes of those who fear him, something more dangerous than a king. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. Though history remembers him by the childhood nickname the soldiers gave him, Caligula, Little Boots. It is almost an absurd name for a figure who will become one of the darkest symbols of imperial power. But Rome is full of such ironies. The boy once dressed in miniature military gear on the Rhine frontier is now emperor. The child carried through army camps by his famous father's troops now commands legions from Britain's edge to Syria's deserts. The survivor of a murdered, exiled, and disgraced family now sits above the very aristocracy that watched his relatives fall, and around him, in the tense final years of his rule, rumours begin to collect like smoke under a ceiling. He speaks to gods, or behaves as though he belongs among them. He humiliates senators who once expected dignity. He spends fortunes in spectacles that dazzle the people while draining the treasury. He turns executions into warnings. He makes the palace feel less like the centre of government and more like a stage where everyone has a role. Except no one knows whether the performance ends in applause or blood. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story of Caligula is not only the story of a ruler said to have gone mad, it is the story of what happens when a wounded young man is handed absolute power by a world that has already learned to worship power as sacred. It is also a story built from broken evidence. Scholars still debate how much of the Caligula we know is real, how much is political hatred, how much is moral theatre written by later Romans eager to explain disaster through personality. Ancient writers preserve scenes so strange they seem almost designed to be remembered, the emperor dressing as a god, ordering impossible displays, threatening the Senate, speaking of his horse as if it might hold office, building a floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae so he can ride across the sea like a conqueror of nature itself. Some of these stories may contain truth. Some may be sharpened by rumour. Some may be hostile exaggerations from men who had every reason to blacken his name after he was dead. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness is part of the mystery. Yet even if one strips away the most theatrical accusations, something troubling remains. Caligula's reign begins in joy and ends in conspiracy. It opens with Rome celebrating the arrival of a beloved prince, and closes with blades in a covered passage. It lasts less than 4 years, a brief flash by imperial standards, and still it leaves one of the longest shadows in Roman memory. His story sits at the dangerous crossing point between illness, trauma, politics, propaganda, and the strange machinery of monarchy disguised as republic. Rome still pretends, at least in language, that it is not ruled by kings. The Senate still meets, magistracies still exist, old names and old ceremonies remain, but everyone knows the truth. One man commands the armies, controls the money, rewards loyalty, punishes insult, and decides how close any noble family may stand to the sun without burning. To understand why Caligula becomes such a lasting nightmare, one has to enter a Rome still adjusting to its own transformation. The Republic is not ancient history to these people. Its ruins are fresh. Grandfathers remember civil war. Families still carry the scars of proscriptions, confiscations, betrayals, and shifting loyalties. Augustus had wrapped one-man rule in careful language, presenting himself as first citizen rather than king. Tiberius, his successor, had withdrawn into suspicion, leaving behind an atmosphere of silence and accusation. By the time Caligula comes to power in the year 37, the Roman elite has already learned that survival depends on reading the emperor's mood. A badly timed joke, an unlucky friendship, a careless expression at dinner, even a rich estate coveted by the wrong person can become dangerous. What survives in the record suggests that Rome under the early emperors is not merely governed, it is watched. And Caligula, at first, seems to offer release. He is young, bright, connected by blood to the beloved Germanicus, whose memory still stirs deep emotion among the people and the army. He is not Tiberius, and that alone is enough for celebration. Crowds welcome him as if a curse has lifted. For a moment, the city imagines renewal. Debts may be forgiven, exiles may return, old fears may loosen. The young emperor appears generous, gracious, almost golden. Coins, ceremonies, games. Public gestures of mercy. Everything seems to suggest a new beginning. But Rome has mistaken beginnings before. Beneath the applause lies a life marked by terror, long before he touched the throne. Caligula has not grown up inside ordinary privilege. He has grown up inside imperial danger. He has seen greatness turn to suspicion, family love turn to political liability, and bloodline become both protection and death sentence. The palace after midnight is therefore not just a place of luxury. It is the final chamber of a life shaped by watching people disappear. The polished floors and painted walls conceal old lessons. Smile when necessary. Say little when watched. Trust no promise too deeply. Remember that affection from the crowd can become a weapon against you, and that the Senate's respect may hide hatred. If later, Romans see madness in Caligula, perhaps part of what they are seeing is a mind formed in a world where fear is rational, then placed in a position where no one can safely tell that mind no. No single explanation fully accounts for what follows. Illness may have played a part, personality may have played a part. The temptations of absolute power almost certainly did. So did the culture around him, a culture that flattered emperors as saviours, punished dissent as treason, and blurred the line between ruler and deity until the ruler himself might begin to believe the performance. In the darkness of Rome, the young emperor moves through rooms built to magnify every desire. Around him stand men who bow, flatter, tremble, calculate. Some hate him, some depend on him, some hope to profit from his favour, some are already imagining the world after him. Outside, the people still want bread, games, justice, and spectacle. The army wants pay and honour. The provinces want stability, or at least predictability. The Senate wants dignity without danger. An impossible combination under a ruler who seems to enjoy proving how little dignity they have left. And Caligula himself, whether sick, cruel, wounded, theatrical, or all of these at once, begins to test the limits of what an emperor can do when the empire has no clear limit to place before him. That is where the mystery begins, not with a monster suddenly appearing in history, but with a child of empire becoming the face of empire's deepest flaw, Rome had created a system in which one man could be praised like a god, feared like a tyrant, obeyed like law, and isolated like a prisoner. Caligula did not invent that system, he inherited it. But in the space of a few feverish years, he revealed something terrifying about it. If the emperor's mind darkened, the whole world had to live inside that darkness. Long before the palace corridors learned to fear his footsteps, Caligula belongs to the frontier. He's not born into peace, not really. He enters the world in the year 12, when the empire still carries the nervous energy of conquest, and the northern edge of Roman power remains a place of mud, forests, rivers, and watchfires. Rome may imagine itself eternal, but along the Rhine, eternity feels less certain. The river is not just water. It is a boundary between the ordered world Rome claims to command and the vast wooded lands beyond. Where Germanic peoples move through landscapes, Roman writers describe with a mixture of fascination, contempt, and dread. Military camps rise along the banks like islands of disciplined ramparts, ditches, rows of tents, smoke from cooking fires, horses stamping in the cold, armour being repaired, boots drying near embers, standards guarded as if they contain the spirit of Rome itself. Into this hard world comes the small boy who will be called Caligula. His father is Germanicus, one of the most admired men of his age, handsome, noble, popular with the people, beloved by the army, and dangerous for exactly those reasons. His mother is Agrippina the Elder, granddaughter of Augustus, proud, forceful, fertile with dynastic meaning. Their children are not merely children. They are living symbols, moving pieces in the dangerous game of succession. But on the Rhine, among soldiers far from Rome's marble and gossip, the young Gaius becomes something more intimate. He's dressed in a tiny soldier's outfit, complete with miniature boots, the caligae worn by legionaries. The men adore him. They laugh, cheer, and call him Caligula, Little Boots. The nickname is affectionate, almost tender, and it clings to him more tightly than any official title he will later bear. There is a strange tenderness in that image, a child walking among hardened soldiers, wearing a costume of war before he can understand war's full meaning. The frontier camps are filled with sounds that would shape any memory the ring of metal, the bark of commands, the rough jokes of men who have marched too far, the low prayers before battle, the winter wind pushing through leather and wool. For the legions, the boy represents continuity. He is Germanicus's son, Augustus's blood, a promise that Rome's ruling family still stands close to the men who defend it. What survives in the record suggests that the soldier's affection for him is real, but it is also political in ways the child cannot yet grasp. In Rome, popularity with the army is never innocent. It can protect a family, raise a man toward the throne, or mark him as a threat. The frontier world around Caligula is still haunted by the catastrophe of the Teutoburg forest, where, only a few years before his birth, 3 Roman legions were destroyed in the German woods. That disaster is more than a military defeat. It is a wound in the Roman imagination. Standards were lost. Commanders died. The dream of turning the lands beyond the Rhine into a stable province cracked under rain, ambush, and forest shadow. Germanicus, Caligula's father, is sent to restore prestige, punish enemies, and recover what Rome can recover. The campaigns are brutal, exhausting, and symbolically charged. Roman soldiers push through marsh and woodland, burn settlements, bury old bones from the massacre, and retrieve captured eagles when fortune allows. Scholars still debate the full strategic meaning of these campaigns, because the evidence remains incomplete and filtered through Roman pride. But their emotional meaning is clearer. Rome is trying to prove to itself that it has not been humbled by the wilderness. The little boy sees none of this as a historian would. He cannot understand the Senate's anxieties, the Emperor Tiberius's suspicions, or the delicate rivalry between military glory and political survival. But children absorb atmosphere before they understand explanation. Caligula grows among adults who speak of loyalty, vengeance, honor, and danger as ordinary facts of life. He sees his father celebrated by men with scarred faces and weathered hands. He sees his mother treated with reverence and calculation. He learns, perhaps without knowing he is learning, that love from soldiers can roar like thunder, that public affection can feel intoxicating, and that a crowd's devotion can lift a family above ordinary human scale. Later, when he rules, he will return again and again to performance before mass audiences, to spectacle, costume, and symbolic gestures. No single childhood memory explains a life, but the frontier gives him an early education in the theatre of power. There is another layer, darker and quieter. Germanicus is not merely popular, he is too popular. In the imperial family, admiration can become fatal. Tiberius, who rules from Rome, has adopted Germanicus under Augustus' arrangements, but adoption in the Julio-Claudian house does not guarantee warmth. It creates claims, obligations, and rival lines of hope. Germanicus's victories and charm make him beloved, and that love places him in a dangerous light. Agrippina, proud of her descent from Augustus, does not hide easily in the background. Their household becomes a moving emblem of an alternative future, one the Roman people and soldiers can imagine with dangerous clarity. The child Caligula stands inside that glow. He is cherished because of who his father is, who his mother is, and what his blood might one day mean. The lesser-known detail is that Caligula's early fame is not built in the capital at all. It begins in a military environment where identity is made through symbols simple enough for thousands of soldiers to grasp at once: a name, a boot, a bloodline, a child held up as belonging to the army. The nickname that later seems ridiculous was born from a genuine bond between dynasty and legion. Yet the same bond may have helped teach him that public image could be more powerful than private reality. He is Gaius to his family, but Caligula to the men, a child, but also a mascot, a son, but also propaganda, innocent, but already useful. When the family eventually leaves the frontier, the mud and smoke of the Rhine do not vanish from the story. They follow him invisibly into Rome's political world. The army has known him. The people know him as Germanicus' child. The name Little Boots travels ahead of him, carrying affection, memory, and expectation. But Rome is not a camp where soldiers cheer a commander's son. Rome is a city of aristocrats who smile while measuring threats, of old families who remember every insult, of rulers who fear any love they do not control. The boy who once walked safely among legionaries is moving toward a court where even children can become dangerous because adults have attached too much hope to them. The frontier gives him his first worshipful audience. The palace will teach him what happens when love turns into suspicion. By the time Caligula leaves the frontier world of soldiers' fires and winter mud, the warmth surrounding his childhood has begun to cool into something more dangerous. Rome still remembers Germanicus with the hunger people reserve for leaders taken from them too soon. His name carries the glow of victory, youth, nobility, and lost possibility. But in the imperial family, that glow does not protect his household. It illuminates it. Every affection shown to Germanicus becomes a measurement of threat. Every cheer for his sons echoes inside the ears of men who understand that succession is not a family matter, but a matter of survival. Germanicus dies in the eastern provinces in the year 19, far from the Rhine camps where his little son had once been adored by the legions. The circumstances are murky, and they remain one of the early empire's most enduring clouds. Ancient accounts describe illness, suspicion, and accusations of poisoning, especially against Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, the governor of Syria, whose conflict with Germanicus became a public scandal. What exactly happened remains debated, because the surviving evidence is shaped by grief. politics, and later retelling. But what matters for Caligula's life is not only whether poison truly killed his father, it is that Rome believed poison might have killed him, and that his mother, Agrippina the Elder, carried his ashes back to Italy like a public accusation. The image is unforgettable, a widow of imperial blood returning with a beloved prince's remains, met by mourning crowds. Agrippina's grief becomes political weather. She's a granddaughter of Augustus, mother of potential heirs, and unwilling to disappear quietly. To the people, she represents loyalty to Germanicus's memory. To Tiberius and those around him, she may represent defiance. Scholars still debate how much Tiberius personally feared her, and how much was driven by the court politics around him, especially the rising power of the ambitious Praetorian prefect Sejanus. But the direction of events is clear enough. Germanicus' family, once radiant with expectation, begins to be dismantled piece by piece. Caligula is still young as the walls close in. His older brothers, Nero and Drusus, become targets in the poisonous climate of accusation that marks Tiberius's later reign. Treason is the empire's most flexible weapon. It can mean conspiracy, disrespect, ambition, or merely existing too close to a future others fear. Informers thrive, and senators learn that silence can be safer than sympathy. Nero is exiled and dies. Drusus is imprisoned and starved. Agrippina is banished to the island of Pandateria, a place already darkened by Julio-Claudian memories, and she too dies in misery. What survives in the record suggests a family destroyed not in one dramatic blow, but through a slow machinery of suspicion, isolation, and legal violence. For Caligula, this is not distant politics. This is childhood and adolescence. His father is gone. His mother is broken by exile. His brothers vanish into imperial punishment. The boy who once symbolized continuity becomes one of the last surviving males of a threatened line. That survival may look fortunate from far away, but inside Tiberius's world it must have felt like standing still while the floor is removed around him. He is spared, but spared into dependency. He is valuable. But value is not safety. He learns that imperial blood does not keep death away. It invites death to sit closer. A lesser-known and chilling detail is that Caligula eventually lives with Tiberius on Capri, the island retreat that later writers transform into a symbol of old age, secrecy, and vice. Capri rises from the blue sea with cliffs, villas, gardens, and views that seem almost too beautiful for the stories attached to it. Whether every scandal told about Tiberius there is true is doubtful. Hostile imagination may have done its work, but for a young survivor of a persecuted family, the island carries its own tension. He is near the man under whose rule his mother and brothers were destroyed. He must be agreeable, watchful, and careful not to mourn too loudly or reveal too much anger. The evidence remains incomplete, but later tradition presents him as skilled at concealment, able to mask hatred beneath obedience. This is one of the hardest parts of Caligula's story to judge, because ancient writers often prefer moral patterns to psychological nuance. They want childhood signs that explain later monstrosity. They look backward and find omens. Yet even without accepting every anecdote, the broad human reality is severe. Caligula's education is not only in literature, ceremony, and aristocratic manners, it is an education in helplessness. He sees that law can be bent around power. He sees that noble names can be erased by decree. He sees that those who survive do so by reading faces, swallowing rage, and waiting. No single explanation fully accounts for what he later becomes, but this long season of fear cannot be separated from the emperor who emerges. Meanwhile, Rome watches with its usual mixture of pity, fascination, and caution. The memory of Germanicus does not die. It becomes more useful because it is safely attached to the dead. Living claimants are dangerous. Dead heroes can be mourned without immediately changing policy. Caligula remains a vessel for that memory. When people look at him, they can imagine the father they lost, the family wronged, the promise deferred. This gives him an emotional capital that no Senate decree can manufacture. It also teaches him something unstable. He is loved not entirely for himself, but for what he represents. The crowd wants Germanicus' son. The army remembers little Boots. The dynasty needs an heir. The court needs a manageable survivor. Very few people seem to need Gaius as an ordinary human being. By the time Tiberius grows old, Caligula has become a young man shaped by contradictions. He is vulnerable and privileged, beloved and endangered, watched and underestimated. He has learned patience in a place where impatience kills. He has learned charm because charm can be armor. He has learned that public affection can outlive disgrace, and that a ruler's household can become a battlefield without open swords. When power finally comes near, it does not come to an innocent prince stepping into light. It comes to a survivor of a poisoned dynasty, carrying inside him the memory of ashes, islands, vanished brothers, and rooms where every word had to be weighed before it was spoken. When Tiberius dies in the year 37, Rome exhales with the force of a city that has been holding its breath for years. The old emperor's final period had left behind a bitter taste trials, informers, withdrawals, rumours from Capri, noble families damaged by suspicion, and a court where fear had become almost administrative. Whether Tiberius deserved every dark story told about him is still debated, because Roman memory often sharpened disliked rulers into moral warnings. But to many people in the capital, his death feels like the end of a long winter. Into that charged moment steps Caligula, 24 years old, son of Germanicus, great-grandson of Augustus through his mother's line, the orphaned survivor of a household many Romans believed had been wronged. He does not yet appear as a monster. He appears as a restoration. The journey toward Rome becomes a kind of public ritual. Crowds gather. People come out not merely to see a new emperor, but to see a living answer to old grief. Germanicus' blood has returned to power. The little boy once cherished by soldiers now arrives as princeps, the first man of the Roman world. The Senate confirms him. The Praetorian Guard supports him. The people celebrate him. For a brief, glowing moment, almost every major force in the empire seems to want the same thing, or at least to say so openly. The young ruler enters a city ready to love him, and that love is one of the most dangerous gifts Rome can give. Caligula understands ceremony. Perhaps he has always understood it, first from the Rhine camps, then from the tense performances of Capri. He knows that power must be seen before it can be believed. In the early months, he acts with striking generosity. He honours the memory of his mother and brothers, bringing their remains back with solemn care, repairing symbolically what Tiberius's reign had broken. The gesture is intimate and political at once. It tells Rome that the dead of Germanicus' family are no longer disgraced. It tells the crowd that loyalty to them was not foolish. It tells the Senate that the new emperor remembers. What survives in the record suggests that these acts mattered deeply, because Roman politics was never only laws and offices. It was memory, burial, ritual, and the public handling of shame. He also grants bonuses to the Praetorian Guard, giving the soldiers who helped secure his position a reason to remain loyal. He stages games and spectacles. He recalls exiles. He destroys or suppresses some records connected with treason accusations, at least according to ancient accounts. Offering the appearance of release from the machinery of fear, he speaks respectfully to the Senate in the beginning, or allows them to believe respect might return. He promises a new atmosphere. The city, trained for years to whisper, begins to raise its voice again. Public hope is not always rational, but it is powerful. Rome has suffered under suspicion, and now it wants youth to mean mercy. There is something almost heartbreaking in this early popularity, because it shows how much Rome wanted Caligula to be good. later stories of cruelty have become so famous that the opening of his reign is often treated as a prelude, a deceptive calm before the storm. But for those living through it, the calm was real. The emperor is young, visible, and connected to beloved ancestors. He seems to reverse old injuries. He spends money freely. And at first, free spending looks like generosity rather than danger. He gives the people entertainment, and in Rome, entertainment is not an ornament of politics. It is one of politics' languages. The empire is vast, unequal, and often harsh. But in the capital, games can make the ruler feel present, abundant, almost parental. Bread, spectacle, gifts, and ceremony turn distance into affection. A lesser-known detail of this early period is the care with which Caligula associates himself with family legitimacy. He's not simply presenting himself as Tiberius's heir. That would not have been enough, and perhaps not even desirable. He draws strength from Germanicus, Agrippina, Augustus, and the wider sacred aura of the Julio-Claudian house, in a dynasty still inventing its own rules. Bloodline is a language everyone understands, but no one can safely define too precisely. Rome officially dislikes monarchy, yet it responds emotionally to hereditary charisma. The Republic's vocabulary remains, but the crowd cheers the son of the man they loved, not the winner of an election. This contradiction lies beneath the whole imperial system. Rome claims to be ruled by offices, but it dreams in families. For the Senate, Caligula's accession carries both relief and anxiety. Many senators had suffered under Tiberius's later years. Some had lost relatives to trials. Others had survived by cooperating with the very system they now wanted to forget. A young emperor who promises clemency allows them to imagine dignity returning. Yet they also know that a princeps beloved by the people and army can dominate them completely if he chooses. Their praise is therefore partly sincere, partly cautious, partly self-protective. The old aristocracy knows how to bend. It has been bending since Augustus, though always while pretending to stand straight. Caligula's first months seem to restore more than political confidence. They restore movement to public life. Temples, theatres, streets, and assemblies feel awake again. The city's sensory world changes garlands, sacrifices, crowded stairways, shouted blessings, the bright violence of arena colour, animals led through streets, vendors feeding audiences, marble warmed by sun, and the emperor's name carried through human noise. The ancient sources, even hostile ones, cannot completely erase the fact that he was loved at first. That early love becomes part of the later horror. The fall is sharper because the rise was so bright. Yet beneath the celebration, unstable elements are already present. Caligula spends as if resources are endless. He rewards loyalty in ways that bind loyalty to money. He uses family memory not only to heal wounds, but to sharpen identity against those associated with past persecutions. He has survived a court where insult, silence, and survival were intertwined. Now everyone who once looked down on him must look up. No single explanation fully accounts for the change that later unfolds. But power often reveals tensions that suffering merely stores away. The young emperor has been watched all his life. Now he can watch others tremble. Still, in this opening stage, Rome does not yet see the abyss. It sees a prince with a famous father's face, an heir who seems to bring the dead home, a ruler who throws open the gates of pleasure after years of cold restraint. The people cheer because they want the story to be simple. A bad age has ended. A golden prince has come. The empire, so recently shadowed by fear, appears to have been given back to youth, memory, and hope. But hope in the imperial palace is never innocent for long. It gathers around one man until it becomes expectation, and expectation becomes pressure, and pressure becomes another kind of prison. Caligula has entered Rome as the answer to everyone's longing. Soon, Rome will begin to discover what it means when that answer believes itself limitless. Then, at the height of public affection, the young emperor falls ill. The city that has been celebrating him suddenly turns anxious. Rome is accustomed to sickness. Of course. Disease moves easily through crowded streets, bathhouses, apartment blocks, markets, barracks, and palaces. Fever is never far away in the ancient world. Even the powerful live with bodies as vulnerable as anyone else's. Despite their physicians, warm rooms, imported remedies, and prayers poured out before polished altars. But when Caligula becomes seriously sick in the autumn of 37, the illness does not feel like an ordinary private danger. It feels like a threat to the emotional story Rome has just told itself. The Prince of Renewal, the beloved son of Germanicus, the young ruler who has barely begun to heal the wounds of Tiberius's age, may vanish before the promise can become reality. Ancient accounts describe a city gripped by fear and devotion. Crowds gather, offerings are made, vows are spoken for his recovery, and some people are said to have pledged their own lives if only the emperor might be spared. The details may be shaped by later drama, but the broader picture is believable. Rome has placed enormous hope in Caligula, and hope becomes panic when the body carrying it begins to fail. The palace, recently filled with ceremonies of triumph, now becomes a chamber of waiting. Servants move softly again. Physicians come and go. Advisors measure not only his pulse, but the political future. If the emperor dies childless and young, the question of succession opens like a wound. Every ambitious family, every soldier, every senator understands that an imperial death can turn the world unstable with terrifying speed. What exactly is wrong with him remains unknown. The evidence remains incomplete, and ancient medicine gives us little precision. Later writers speak of a severe illness, but not in terms that allow a confident modern diagnosis. Some have speculated about fever, encephalitis, epilepsy, poisoning, nervous collapse, or a psychological break intensified by physical disease, but these remain guesses rather than established facts. Scholars still debate whether the illness truly changed Caligula's mind or whether hostile sources used it as a convenient hinge, a dramatic moment when the Golden Prince becomes the tyrant. Ancient historians often liked moral turning points. They shaped lives into patterns of promise, corruption, punishment. A sudden sickness provides the perfect narrative doorway. Before it, generosity. After it, cruelty. Real lives are rarely so neat. Still, the illness matters even if it did not magically transform him. A near-death experience can change a ruler, especially one raised among executions, exile, and dynastic terror. Caligula had already learned that life in the imperial family is temporary, conditional, and watched. Now his own body betrays him at the very moment he seems most adored. He may have discovered, in those fevered days, that public love cannot keep death away. The people can pray, the Senate can flatter. Guards can protect the door, but no army can command the blood, breath, and burning brain of a sick young man. For someone already formed by loss and suspicion, recovery may not have brought gratitude alone. It may have brought impatience, contempt, or the chilling conviction that survival proves special favour. When he rises from the illness, the tone of the reign begins to darken. At least, that is how the ancient sources remember it. One of the earliest victims is Gemellus, the grandson of Tiberius and Caligula's co-heir, in a technical or symbolic sense. Gemellus is young, politically vulnerable, and dangerous simply because he exists. In the delicate arrangement left after Tiberius's death, he represents an alternative branch of legitimacy. Caligula first adopts him, then turns against him. Ancient accounts claim that during the emperor's sickness, Gemellus was suspected of hoping for his death, perhaps even of smelling an antidote on his breath, an accusation that sounds as strange as it is revealing. whether this detail is literal truth or malicious embroidery. The political fact remains Gemellus dies on Caligula's orders. The golden beginning has acquired its first unmistakable shadow. The removal of Gemellus is not merely a personal act. It signals that the young emperor will not tolerate even symbolic rivals. Rome had seen this pattern before. In a dynasty without a clear law of succession, survival often required eliminating ambiguity. Augustus had watched potential heirs die. Tiberius had lived amid suspicion. Germanicus's family had been destroyed by the fear of competing futures. Caligula now acts within that same brutal logic, though perhaps with less restraint. The surprising detail is that his action, while later treated as a sign of madness, also fits the cold political arithmetic of the Julio-Claudian house. In Rome's imperial family, a harmless prince could become a banner the moment discontent needed one. Yet something in the manner of Caligula's rule appears to shift. His early gestures of shared hope give way to sharper displays of dominance. He seems less interested in reassuring the Senate, and more interested in reminding them that their dignity depends entirely on him. The language of partnership thins. The atmosphere tightens. Those who had greeted him as a saviour now begin to learn the more dangerous side of being ruled by someone who feels both adored and betrayed by the world. If he has survived when many around him expected or prepared for his death, he may have seen waiting faces differently afterward. Concern could be interpreted as calculation. Silence could look like disappointment. Courtiers who prayed for him one day might be suspected of measuring their chances the next. No single explanation fully accounts for this turn. It is possible that illness affected his judgment, perhaps through neurological or psychological consequences impossible to diagnose from this distance. It is possible that the ancient writers exaggerated the contrast between before and after because a dramatic fall made better moral history. It is also possible that the illness simply revealed pressures already present: trauma, insecurity, limitless authority, and the intoxication of being the object of a city's prayers. Power after near death can become more reckless. The ruler who has looked into the dark and returned may feel time differently. He may spend faster, punish faster, demand more visible obedience, and seek proof that he is not merely first among citizens, but somehow chosen above ordinary men. The people of Rome could not see all this at once. They saw fragments of a recovered emperor, ceremonies resumed, games continuing, honours multiplying, a young co-heir dead, senators more careful in their expressions, the palace growing harder to read. The city's earlier joy did not vanish overnight. Affection can outlast warning signs, especially when it has been invested so deeply. But the fever had done something to the story. It had introduced mortality into the myth of renewal, and when Caligula emerged from it, he seemed less like the gentle heir of Germanicus, and more like a man determined that no weakness, no rival, no memory of dependence would be allowed to stand near him again. Rome had prayed for him to live. It would soon begin to wonder what, exactly, had returned. After the illness, Caligula's reign begins to show the strange pressure of a system that has no ordinary human boundary. Rome still possesses the old names of republican government. The Senate still gathers beneath decorated ceilings and ancestral memories. Magistrates still wear their robes. Priests still perform rites. Laws still have formulas. And aristocrats still speak as if public dignity is something the state itself protects. But the truth sits above all of it in a single living body. The emperor can reward disgrace, enrich, impoverish, exile, or kill. He can turn a private irritation into a public case. He can transform loyalty into wealth and hesitation into danger. The old constitution has not vanished, but it has become a stage set around a new fact: Rome is ruled by a man who is expected to behave like a citizen while being obeyed like a god. For a young ruler shaped by loss, this contradiction is combustible. Caligula has survived the destruction of his family under a system that pretended to be lawful. He has watched noble language cover fear, He has lived close to Tiberius, whose rule taught Rome that the emperor's suspicion could travel farther than any army. Now that same system tells Caligula he is the guardian of liberty, the father of the state, the first among equals, and the sacred centre of imperial loyalty all at once. No single explanation fully accounts for what he does with that inheritance, but one cannot ignore the absurdity built into the office itself. The emperor is asked to be modest while everyone kneels. He is told he is human while sacrifices, statues, oaths, and public prayers suggest otherwise. He is warned against tyranny by men who will flatter him the moment his face turns cold. Power, in this world, is not merely administrative, it is sensory. It surrounds Caligula every morning when attendants dress him, when guards stand aside, when petitioners lower their eyes, when senators rise at his entrance, when crowds shout blessings, when coins carry his image across provinces he will never see. His face passes from hand to hand in bronze, silver, and gold. His name is attached to vows, legal acts, military loyalty, and public festivals in the provinces, especially in the Greek East. Ruler worship already has deep habits. Cities compete to honour imperial power with temples, altars, priesthoods, and ceremonies. Rome itself is more cautious, at least in theory, because Romans remember their hatred of kings and their suspicion of the living men who demand divine honours. But the empire is not governed by theory, it is governed by practice, and practice keeps telling the emperor that he stands somewhere above the ordinary. This is where Caligula's personal wounds and Rome's political religion begin to blur. If he dresses as a god, appears in divine costume, or allows sacred honours to cluster around him, later writers treat it as madness. Perhaps sometimes it was. Yet the evidence remains incomplete, and the boundary between accepted imperial honour and shocking self-deification was not always as clear as Romans pretended. Augustus had been careful, but even he allowed divine associations and received worship in certain contexts, especially outside Rome. Dead emperors could be officially deified. The imperial household was surrounded by sacred language. Caligula's offence may not have been inventing the connection between ruler and divinity. It may have been making the connection too direct, too soon, too theatrical, and too humiliating for the elite who preferred their submission wrapped in restraint. There is a lesser-known danger in all of this. The Roman emperor does not only rule people who believe in gods, he rules a world where public order and divine order are deeply entwined. Omens matter, sacrifices matter. The favour of heaven is not a private belief but a civic concern. If the emperor appears favoured by the gods, the state seems secure. If the emperor appears to rival the gods, mock them, or consume their honours too greedily, anxiety spreads. Caligula's gestures therefore do more than offend taste. They disturb the symbolic architecture of Roman life. To a senator, a ruler pretending to be Jupiter may be arrogance. To a priest, it may be ritual confusion. To the crowd, it may be dazzling or frightening depending on the day. To Caligula himself, it may be proof that no earthly rank is large enough for the power he has been given. Absolute rule also isolates the ruler from correction. In an ordinary household, a reckless young man may be checked by parents, friends, creditors, rivals, or consequences. Caligula has almost none of these in a normal form. His parents are dead. His brothers are dead. His childhood world has been consumed by imperial suspicion. Friends are not simply friends. They are courtiers whose lives depend on pleasing him. Rivals cannot safely be rivals, so they become conspirators or corpses. Consequences arrive slowly because the treasury, the army, and the machinery of government can absorb enormous strain before breaking. This delay is dangerous. It teaches the ruler that impulse works, a command is given, and people obey. A humiliation is staged, and people endure it. Money is spent, and more is found. A man dies, and the sun rises. What survives in the record suggests that Caligula begins to test obedience as if testing the walls of a room. He pushes against the Senate, against aristocratic pride, against religious restraint, against the difference between public office and private appetite. He seems to enjoy making powerful men remember their dependence. This may have been cruelty. It may also have been revenge sharpened by memory. He had seen the Senate under Tiberius cooperate with accusations that destroyed families. He knew that many noblemen who spoke of liberty had survived by serving fear. If he treats them with contempt, he may not see himself as betraying Roman dignity. He may see himself as exposing hypocrisy. The tragedy is that exposure, in his hands, becomes another form of domination. The line between performance and belief becomes increasingly difficult to see. Caligula is theatrical, and Roman politics rewards theatre, triumphs, funerals, sacrifices, games, robes, gestures, seating arrangements, and titles all communicate power. But performance can trap the performer. If everyone trembles when he plays the god, if crowds cheer when he appears above them, if senators obey even his most degrading commands, then the role begins to harden around him. He may not need to believe literally that he is divine in every sober moment. It is enough that the world behaves as if he is beyond reach. A man surrounded by rehearsed awe may begin to lose the sound of honest human speech. And so the empire enters a more dangerous phase. Caligula is not simply becoming cruel in private, nor merely extravagant in public. He is discovering the emptiness where a limit should be. The laws remain, but they bend. Customs remain, but they can be mocked. Men of ancient lineage remain, but they can be made to crawl. Gods remain, but their imagery can be worn. The young survivor of a poisoned dynasty now stands inside a system that magnifies every wound, every suspicion, every appetite, and every theatrical instinct. Rome has given him a world in which almost no one can say no. The mystery is not only why Caligula reaches for inhuman power. The deeper mystery is why Rome built a throne that invited any man sitting on it to forget he was human. The Senate had survived kings, civil wars, dictators, proscriptions, and the long, careful transformation by which Augustus made monarchy look like restoration. It had learned the language of endurance. Its members could praise liberty while accepting command, mourn old freedoms while voting new honours, and pretend that dignity remained untouched so long as the forms remained visible. Marble halls, ancestral masks, purple-edged robes, old family names, ritual phrases. The solemn movement of debate, all of it, allowed Rome's governing class to believe that history still passed through its hands. Caligula begins to attack not only their power, which had already been weakened before he was born, but the illusion that made their weakness bearable. At first, he had treated them with enough courtesy to let hope breathe. But after the bright opening of the reign, after the illness and the removal of rivals, the relationship hardens. The senators become an audience he can command, a body he can shame, a reminder of the class that had watched his mother and brothers fall under Tiberius. Many of these men, or their fathers and allies, had taken part in the culture of accusation that destroyed Germanicus's household. Some had remained silent because silence was safer. Some had profited. Some had merely survived. Caligula may have seen no meaningful difference. What survives in the record suggests that he had a long memory for fear and betrayal, and once power was his, old wounds could be turned into public lessons. He forces senators into postures of submission that cut deeper than ordinary political obedience. Ancient sources describe scenes of elite humiliation, men of high rank running beside his chariot, waiting at his doors like servants, being insulted openly, being made to understand that ancestry means nothing in the presence of imperial favour. The details may be sharpened by hostile memory, because senators were among the people most eager to preserve stories of their own degradation after Caligula's death. Yet the pattern is plausible. Roman aristocrats were intensely sensitive to rank, seating, titles, invitations, order of speaking, and the thousand small signals by which status lived. To dishonour a senator didn't require chains. It could be done with a gesture, a delayed greeting, a place at dinner, a command to attend at an inconvenient hour. A joke that everyone had to laugh at. This is one of the lesser-known truths about Roman power. Humiliation was political technology. A ruler did not always need to execute. He could rearrange the emotional furniture of the elite world until every noble man remembered who owned the room. Caligula seems to understand this instinctively. His cruelty toward the Senate, if the sources are even partly reliable, is not random shouting. It is theatre aimed at the pride of men who'd been raised to believe they were the natural partners of rule. He makes them feel like dependents, because in practice, they are dependents. The old republic had trained aristocrats to compete for honour before their peers. The empire trains them to seek safety from one man. The Senate's fear grows because Caligula's anger is difficult to predict. Under a stable autocrat, even oppression can become a system people learn to navigate. Under a ruler who shifts between charm, mockery, extravagance, and threat, the court becomes a weather pattern no one can read with confidence. A senator may come to a banquet unsure whether he will receive favour, insult, or accusation. A careless expression may be interpreted as contempt. Too much enthusiasm may look false. Too little may look disloyal. In such an atmosphere, people become actors trapped in a performance where the script changes while they speak. Scholars still debate how far Caligula's behaviour reflects mental instability, political strategy, inherited resentment, or later exaggeration. But the result described by the sources is unmistakable. Rome's highest men learned to tremble in public. One famous theme in the accounts is Caligula's contempt for senatorial hypocrisy. He reportedly reminded the senators of their behaviour under Tiberius, when men condemned others to protect themselves, praised those they feared, and turned public virtue into a mask for survival. Even if the exact words are uncertain, the sentiment fits the age. The Senate had not been an innocent victim of imperial terror. It had participated in it, sometimes unwillingly, sometimes eagerly. Caligula's rage at them may therefore have carried a bitter moral edge. He could look at these dignified men and see not guardians of Rome, but polished survivors who had bowed to every dangerous ruler and then pretended their obedience had been wisdom. The evidence remains incomplete, but this tension helps explain why his attacks could feel both personal and ideological. Yet exposure of hypocrisy does not make a just ruler. Caligula does not restore freedom by revealing servility. He deepens servility by making it more naked. The Senate's old weakness had been softened by ceremony. He strips away the softness. This is why his reign feels so violent even when swords are not visible. He turns political reality into spectacle. If the senators are powerless, he makes them display powerlessness. If they depend on him, he makes dependence embarrassing. If they fear death, he lets that fear sit at dinner beside them. There is a dry Roman irony here, though no one trapped inside it would have found it funny the aristocracy had helped create a world where one man stood above the laws. And now they were offended when that man behaved as if he knew it. The danger spreads through families. Senators are not isolated officials. They are husbands, fathers, patrons, creditors, priests, commanders, and heirs to names carved into public memory. When Caligula humiliates one, he unsettles an entire network. Clients wonder whether their patron is still safe. Relatives calculate whether closeness has become dangerous. Friends decide how much sympathy can be shown without inviting attention. Wealth becomes a liability because emperors always need money. An accusation can empty a house faster than taxation. The palace's mood reaches into dining rooms, country villas, marriage arrangements, wills, and whispered advice given to sons old enough to understand that a famous name may now be more burden than shield. And Caligula does not merely frighten the Senate by direct insult. He frightens it by blurring seriousness and performance. A joke from the emperor can be deadly because no one knows whether it is a joke. A theatrical threat may become policy. A symbolic act may carry real consequences. The elite are trained to interpret signs, but Caligula floods them with signs too unstable to decode. This is power at its most corrosive, not constant violence, but constant uncertainty. Men begin to police their faces before they police their words. They learn to laugh carefully. They learn to praise quickly. They learn that survival may require appearing grateful for degradation. By now the young emperor's rule has moved far from the golden morning of his accession. The same city that cheered Germanicus's son now watches him turn inherited love into domination. The Senate, once eager to welcome him as release from Tiberian fear, discovers that fear has not ended. It has changed its clothing. Under Tiberius, danger often moved through informers, accusations, and distant suspicion. Under Caligula, danger stands closer, brighter, more theatrical, sometimes smiling as it humiliates. The old men in their robes still meet. Decrees are still passed. Honours are still voted. Rome's ancient machinery continues to turn. But beneath the polished forms, a new lesson has settled into the marble under an emperor determined to test his power. Even the highest citizens are only safe until he decides to remind them they are not. As fear settles into the Senate, Caligula turns increasingly toward the crowd, the arena, the theatre, and the dazzling language of public pleasure. Rome has always understood spectacle as more than amusement. Games are politics made visible. They allow the ruler to feed the city's hunger for wonder, violence, generosity, and shared emotion. In the amphitheatre and circus, social rank remains carefully arranged, but everyone looks toward the same centre: senators, equestrians, common citizens. Freedmen, foreign visitors, slaves standing behind their masters, all become part of one vast human body reacting to blood, music, animals, chariots, prizes, and imperial presence. A ruler who can command that body can feel, for a few hours, as if he commands the soul of Rome itself. Caligula spends as though this feeling must never end. The early generosity that helped make him beloved begins to grow into something more reckless. He stages games, gladiatorial shows, theatrical performances, races, distributions, banquets, and public displays that turn money into noise and loyalty into applause. Exotic animals are brought into the city, not merely as creatures, but as signs of empire's reach. The more distant the beast, the more powerful the ruler appears. Rome's crowds may never see the deserts, forests, mountains, and frontiers from which these animals come, but they can watch them die under imperial sponsorship. The empire becomes a spectacle of possession. Everything strange can be captured. Everything captured can be displayed. Everything displayed can be consumed by the eyes of the capital. There is a cruel brilliance in this system. Public entertainment softens fear by giving it rhythm and colour. A ruler who humiliates senators can still be cheered by the people if he gives them games enough to remember him with excitement rather than dread. Caligula knows, or quickly learns, that aristocratic hatred and popular enthusiasm do not always move together. The Senate may whisper about tyranny, while the crowd praises abundance. The treasury may strain while the city sees generosity. A single day of spectacle can drown weeks of unease beneath shouting, music, dust, and sun. What survives in the record suggests that Caligula's public extravagance was not incidental to his rule. It was one of the ways he turned instability into performance. But money, even imperial money, is not limitless. Tiberius had left a substantial reserve, built partly from caution and restraint. Caligula burns through resources with astonishing speed, at least according to hostile ancient writers. The exact figures are difficult to trust, because ancient sources often use financial excess as a moral symbol, but the broader pattern is clear enough. His spending creates pressure. Gifts to soldiers, games for the people, building projects, luxury, ceremonies. And experiments in magnificence require streams of wealth that must come from somewhere. When the early reserve begins to shrink, generosity starts to show its second face. Confiscations, forced contributions, revived taxes, auctions, legal pressures, and accusations can become tools not only of punishment but of revenue. This is one of the darker mechanics of imperial extravagance. The crowd may receive pleasure, but the elite often pay for it, sometimes with their estates, sometimes with their lives. Wealthy men become tempting targets because moral accusation and financial need can easily travel together. If a senator is convicted, his property may enrich the ruler. If a noble family is disgraced, its treasures may pass into imperial hands. In such a world, fear itself becomes a form of taxation. Men make gifts before being asked. They revise wills. They flatter not only to survive, but to keep their houses intact. The evidence remains incomplete, and not every charge against Caligula can be accepted at face value. Yet the connection between spectacle and extraction is one of the great patterns of autocratic power. The ruler spends publicly, then searches privately for the means to continue spending. The spectacles themselves also reveal Caligula's hunger for control over reality. Ordinary games are not enough if they only repeat what earlier rulers have done. Each emperor must find a way to appear larger than his predecessors. Novelty becomes a political need. Rome has seen gladiators, races, staged hunts, mock battles, and theatrical cruelty before. To astonish a city trained in astonishment, a ruler must escalate. The surprising detail is that Roman crowds were not passive fools before entertainment. They were experienced spectators, sensitive to quality, expense, novelty, and imperial style. They knew when a ruler was generous. They knew when games were cheap. They knew the difference between routine obligation and magnificence. Caligula's extravagance therefore functioned as a kind of competitive communication. He was not simply amusing the city. He was proving that his rule could exceed ordinary measure. Yet excess also exposes insecurity. A ruler who must always dazzle may fear the silence that follows spectacle. Applause is addictive because it is temporary. The crowd's love has to be renewed, purchased again and again with grain, games, gifts, and marvels. Caligula had entered power on a wave of inherited affection, but inherited affection fades unless fed. The son of Germanicus must become something more immediate, the emperor who gives, the emperor who surprises, the emperor whose presence makes the city erupt. This may help explain why his public life becomes so theatrical. The arena gives him what the Senate withholds: visible submission, without aristocratic resentment, or at least without resentment that matters in the moment. The crowd does not ask him to be modest. It asks him to be magnificent. No single explanation fully accounts for the extravagance. Some of it belongs to Roman political culture itself. Some of it may reflect youth, appetite, and the desire to erase the cold austerity of Tiberius. Some may come from Caligula's deep need to transform vulnerability into spectacle. A man who nearly died may spend as if time must be conquered through intensity. A survivor of family destruction may turn memory into public triumph. A ruler who distrusts senators may seek legitimacy in the roar of the circus, and a young emperor told daily that the world bends around him may begin to treat the wealth of that world as an extension of his own will. The city glitters while the accounts darken. Marble rises, awnings stretch over crowds, horses thunder around the circus, performers sweat beneath masks, gladiators wait in the dust, and the emperor's image multiplies across ceremonies of delight. But behind the brilliance lies a growing tension. Spectacle can hide political weakness. but it can also create new weakness by consuming the resources that make rule stable. Pleasure becomes policy, astonishment becomes expectation, the treasury. Once a quiet foundation of power becomes a warning sign, Rome is being entertained at enormous cost, and cost always returns, even when delayed by fear. By this stage, Caligula's reign has begun to resemble one of his own shows, dazzling from a distance, dangerous near the machinery. The crowd sees colour, movement, abundance, and the emperor's generosity displayed under the open sky. The Senate sees confiscation, humiliation, and the shrinking distance between financial need and political accusation. The palace sees appetites growing around a ruler who has discovered that applause can be commanded almost as surely as obedience. Rome laughs, cheers, eats, watches, and trembles, sometimes on the same day, and beneath the roar of games and the glitter of public pleasure, the empire begins to hear the faint, dry sound of emptying coffers. As the games grow brighter and the treasury grows thinner, Caligula's imagination turns toward a form of power even wealth cannot fully measure. He begins to move more openly into the sacred language of rule, where the emperor is no longer only commander, judge, benefactor, or avenger, but something hovering near the divine. Rome had always lived close to its gods. They stood in temples, watched from household shrines, received smoke from altars, guarded crossroads, fields, births, treaties, marriages, armies, and graves. The city's public life was woven with ritual so tightly that politics without religion would have seemed almost impossible. Every magistrate knew the value of auspices. Every army marched beneath sacred standards. Every disaster invited questions about divine anger. In that world, for an emperor to reach toward godhood was not a childish fantasy placed on top of politics. It was a direct disturbance inside the machinery of Roman order. Caligula did not invent imperial divinity. That is important, because the later image of him as a man suddenly declaring himself a god can make the story seem simpler than it was. Julius Caesar had been deified after death. Augustus became divine after death as well. And even during life he allowed careful forms of sacred honour, especially in the provinces, where ruler cult traditions were older and more flexible. Temples to Rome and Augustus rose in distant cities, and provincial elites used worship of the emperor's house as a way to express loyalty, ambition, and local prestige. The imperial family already stood beneath a sacred glow. The dead could become gods. The living could be associated with gods, statues, sacrifices, priesthoods, festivals, and oaths all helped lift the ruler above ordinary rank. What made Caligula alarming was not that he stepped onto sacred ground, but that he seemed to stride across it too boldly, with too little caution, and perhaps with too much enjoyment. Ancient writers describe him dressing as various deities, appearing as Jupiter, Neptune, Hercules, Apollo, Venus, or other divine figures depending on the occasion. They describe him receiving worship, placing his image among the gods, demanding honours that shocked Roman sensibilities, and treating temples almost as extensions of the palace. The evidence remains incomplete, and some details may have been exaggerated by hostile sources who wanted to show that his arrogance had passed beyond human limits. Yet even if the most theatrical episodes are reduced, the pattern remains significant. Caligula seems to have tested how far imperial symbolism could go before it became blasphemy, absurdity, or terror. He did not merely want obedience, he wanted a form of recognition that made obedience feel cosmic. One of the most striking reported projects involved a temple or sacred space dedicated to his own divine presence, with priests, offerings, and images arranged around him as if the living emperor had entered the world of cult. In Rome, this was dangerous. The city could tolerate many contradictions, but it still preserved a public dislike of kingship and an instinctive discomfort with treating a living Roman as a god in the heart of the capital. The Senate might vote extravagant honours, but it preferred those honours to remain wrapped in traditional restraint. Caligula's sacred performances tore at that wrapping. If Augustus had mastered the art of being more than human while appearing modestly human, Caligula seemed to expose the hidden truth too nakedly. The emperor was already being obeyed with a reverence dangerously close to worship. There is a lesser-known political edge to this divine theatre. By identifying himself with gods, Caligula also placed himself above the old aristocratic competition for honour. Senators could claim noble ancestors, ancient offices, military victories, priesthoods, and family masks displayed in funeral processions. But no senator could compete with Jupiter. Divine imagery became a way of humiliating human rank. If the emperor stands among the gods, then the Senate is not his partner, not even his dignified servant, but something lower and smaller, a mortal chorus arranged beneath a sacred stage. For men trained to measure status with exquisite care, this was intolerable. They might endure a powerful princeps. They might even endure a tyrant. But a ruler who demanded that they play worshippers in his personal drama attacked the last invisible refuge of their pride. The strange thing is that the crowd may not always have reacted with the same horror. Public religion in Rome included procession, costume, spectacle, music, incense, and visual splendour. Seeing the emperor appear in divine attributes could be thrilling, unsettling, comic, magnificent, or offensive depending on context and audience. The line between ritual and performance was not always sharp. A god's costume in a festival did not mean the actor believed himself eternal. A ruler wearing divine symbols didn't necessarily mean he had lost all contact with reality. Scholars still debate whether Caligula literally believed he was a god, cynically used divine imagery to assert domination, enjoyed shocking the elite, suffered from delusion, or moved among these possibilities at different moments. No single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. But perception mattered more than private belief. If senators believed he was mocking the gods, they feared him. If priests believed ritual boundaries were being violated, they worried about divine anger. If courtiers believed resistance was dangerous, they praised him. If the crowd found the display dazzling, they cheered. And if Caligula saw all these reactions, he learned again that sacred performance could make the world rearrange itself around him. The emperor had already discovered that money could buy applause and fear could bend the Senate. Now he discovered that divine imagery could make submission feel like destiny. The more Rome trembled, the easier it became to mistake trembling for reverence. The sacred ambition also reveals a lonely emptiness inside absolute power. To be first among men may not satisfy a man who has watched men die helplessly, who has survived illness, who has been praised as saviour, and who has seen every human limit around him collapse. A throne built too high can make ordinary humanity seem like an insult. Caligula's reach toward godhood may have been arrogance, but it may also have been a desperate attempt to escape the vulnerability that had marked his life from childhood. Fathers die, mothers are exiled, brothers starve, heirs are murdered, bodies fall sick. But gods do not tremble before informers, disease, or succession. To dress as a god is perhaps to pretend, for a moment, that the old terror has finally been conquered. Yet Rome could not live safely inside one man's sacred performance. The empire needed ritual order, not confusion. It needed a ruler honoured by the gods, not one who seemed to crowd them. It needed the emperor to be extraordinary, but not so extraordinary that every other rank, law, custom, and altar became meaningless. Caligula pushed against that delicate balance until the balance itself began to look absurd. If the emperor was only human, why did everyone obey him like fate if he was divine? Why did he bleed, rage, spend, suspect, and need guards in the corridor? The question hung silently over the palace, over the Senate, over the temples, and over every statue raised in his image. Rome had taught its ruler to stand above mankind. Now it was frightened by how eagerly he accepted the lesson. Beyond the public games, the sacred costumes, and the Senate's staged humiliations, Caligula's reign becomes most difficult to see clearly in the private rooms of power. Ancient writers lead us through doorways where certainty fades, dining chambers, inner courts, guarded corridors, bedrooms, small councils, and places where fear leaves fewer witnesses. In these rooms, the emperor is said to have turned suspicion into death with frightening ease. Men are accused, condemned, forced into suicide, or executed after moments of favour. Friends discover that closeness to the ruler can be more dangerous than distance. Families learn that a name spoken too often in the palace may become a sentence. Yet this is also where the historian must walk carefully, because private cruelty is exactly the kind of subject hostile sources could darken after the fact. The evidence remains incomplete, and the Caligula who moves through these stories is partly a man, partly a warning image built by those who survived him or hated his memory. Still, the record cannot be dismissed as mere invention. Too many patterns fit the political reality of his reign. Caligula removes rivals. He punishes perceived disloyalty. He uses executions not only to eliminate threats, but to instruct the living. The palace becomes a place where emotional intimacy has no safety in it. In a normal human world, friendship softens judgment. In an imperial court, friendship increases access, and access increases risk. A companion who drinks with the emperor may hear too much, see too much, or become too confident. A favourite may rise quickly, but the height only makes the fall more visible. What survives in the record suggests a ruler who could move from charm to menace without warning, and that unpredictability may have been more terrifying than cruelty alone. One of the grim truths of the early empire is that execution often carried a performance element. Even when no crowd was present, a condemned aristocrat might be allowed, or ordered, to die by his own hand, preserving a thin shadow of dignity while making obedience complete. A family might be spared publicly while losing its wealth privately. A death might be justified with accusations no one dared challenge. Caligula inherited these methods from a political culture already familiar with disguised violence. Tiberius's reign had taught Rome how treason trials could turn suspicion into property, silence into guilt, and friendship into evidence. Caligula did not invent the machinery, but ancient accounts suggest he used it with a more personal, theatrical, and sometimes mocking edge. The darker stories often centre on his delight in fear. He is said to have enjoyed reminding people that their lives rested in his hands, to have spoken casually of killing, to have treated the terror of others as entertainment. Some anecdotes are so polished in their cruelty that they may have been shaped by literary tradition, because Roman writers loved examples that revealed character in a single sharp scene. Scholars still debate how many of these episodes preserve real incidents, and how many were sharpened into moral portraits. But even if some details are exaggerated, they point toward an atmosphere people believed had existed, a court in which no one could trust yesterday's favour to protect tomorrow's life. This terror reaches into Caligula's own circle. The emperor's sisters, especially Drusilla, Livilla, and Agrippina the Younger, occupy a strange and dangerous place near him. They are imperial women of immense symbolic value, descendants of Augustus, carriers of dynastic legitimacy, and potential links to future power. Caligula honours them publicly in unusual ways, placing them prominently in oaths and ceremonies, and his affection for Drusilla in particular becomes one of the most discussed features of his reign. When Drusilla dies in 38, his grief is reported as extreme, and she is deified, becoming Diva Drusilla. The action is not impossible within Roman religious practice, but the intensity of it unsettles later observers. Rumours of incest surround his relationships with his sisters, though such claims must be treated with caution. They may reflect real scandal, hostile propaganda, or the Roman habit of describing tyrants as sexually transgressive in order to show that political disorder had invaded the household. The important point is that even family does not remain stable. Livilla and Agrippina the Younger are later exiled after a conspiracy involving Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, Drusilla's widower and once a favoured figure close to the emperor. The details of the plot are murky, and no single explanation fully accounts for the surviving evidence, but the event reveals how quickly intimacy can become treason. Lepidus, connected to the imperial family and perhaps once imagined as a possible successor or trusted ally, is executed. The sisters are sent away. The ruler who had elevated his family's memory now turns against living members of that same family when their proximity appears threatening. In the Julio-Claudian world, blood is never only blood. It is a claim waiting for circumstance. There is a lesser-known human consequence in this atmosphere of court terror, the collapse of ordinary trust among those near power. Servants, freedmen, guards, relatives, senators, wives, and guests must all learn to survive in a world where information itself is dangerous. To know the emperor's mood is useful, but to know too much can become fatal. To be invited often may signal favour, but it also means exposure. To speak frankly is madness. To flatter poorly is nearly as dangerous. People begin to live by small calculations. They notice who is seated near whom. They observe whose name has stopped being mentioned. They study whether a messenger comes at dawn or after dinner. Fear becomes a private calendar. Caligula's cruelty, then, is not only measured in deaths, it is measured in the widening zone of uncertainty around him. A ruler does not need to kill everyone to make everyone feel killable. In fact, selective violence can be more effective than constant slaughter because it leaves survivors alert, grateful, ashamed, and obedient. The palace becomes a school of nervous attention. Those who pass through it carry that fear outward into the Senate, the courts, the great houses of Rome, and the military command structure. The emperor's private rooms become the hidden engine of public obedience. And yet, even here, the mystery of Caligula must remain partly unresolved. Was he a sadist shaped by unlimited power, a traumatized survivor reenacting the violence that formed him, a politically calculating ruler using terror deliberately, a sick young man whose judgment had fractured, or a figure made monstrous by enemies after his death? The most honest answer is that the evidence does not allow one clean portrait. What emerges is more disturbing than a single diagnosis. Caligula stands inside a system where suspicion is rewarded, where human beings become instruments, where family love becomes dynastic risk, and where fear can be mistaken for loyalty because it produces the same bowed heads. In the private rooms, the empire's grandeur shrinks to its smallest and coldest shape, one man speaking, others listening, and everyone knowing that a pause, a glance, or a rumour may decide who leaves alive. Among all the stories attached to Caligula, 2 have survived with a force almost greater than the reign itself, the horse that was treated like a statesman, and the bridge across the sea. They are strange stories, memorable stories, almost too perfectly shaped to be forgotten. They have passed through centuries because they seem to reveal the whole emperor in miniature absurdity, arrogance, cruelty, extravagance, and the terrifying comedy of power without restraint. Yet they also demand caution. The most famous anecdotes about a hated ruler are often the least innocent. They may preserve real events, but they also become symbols, sharpened by repetition, until the symbol outshines the fact. The horse is Incitatus, whose name means something like swift or at full gallop. Ancient writers claim that Caligula loved this animal with a seriousness that bordered on parody. Incitatus is said to have had a marble stable, an ivory manger, purple blankets, jewelled ornaments, a household of slaves, and invitations to dine. The most famous claim is that Caligula intended to make him consul, one of the highest offices in the Roman state. It is a detail so outrageous that it has become almost inseparable from Caligula's name. The mad emperor would rather honour a horse than a senator. The joke writes itself, and perhaps that is exactly why it survived. But the story may not mean what later readers often assume. Scholars still debate whether Caligula truly planned to appoint Incitatus to office, whether he merely joked about it, whether he used the horse to insult the Senate, or whether hostile writers turned a cruel joke into evidence of insanity. The evidence remains incomplete. What can be said is that the Incitatus story fits Caligula's known pattern of humiliating aristocratic dignity. To suggest that a horse could become consul was not only absurd, it was a political insult of extraordinary precision. It implied that Rome's most ancient offices had become empty honours, that senators were so obedient and useless that even an animal could perform their role. In a world where office still mattered deeply to elite identity, this was a wound disguised as comedy. The cruelty of the joke lies in its truth. By Caligula's time, the consulship still carried prestige, but real power no longer belonged to consuls as it had in the Republic. The emperor dominated the state. Senators could compete for honours, robes, titles, and ceremonial precedence. But their authority depended on imperial favour. If Caligula mocked them by elevating his horse, he was not creating emptiness. He was pointing to emptiness already there. That does not make him wise or just. It makes him dangerous, because he understood how to turn Rome's own contradictions into humiliation. A horse in purple trappings could expose the Senate more sharply than a speech. Everyone could laugh, but no one could laugh safely. The bridge at Baiae belongs to the same world of spectacle, but on a far grander scale. Baiae, on the Bay of Naples, was a place of luxury, heat, villas, gossip, and sea air, where Rome's elite came to enjoy pleasure under the shadow of volcanic landscapes. The coastline was beautiful and morally suspicious in the Roman imagination, associated with softness, indulgence, and aristocratic excess. There, according to ancient accounts, Caligula ordered ships to be lined across the bay, forming a temporary floating bridge stretching from Baiae toward Puteoli. Earth was piled over the vessels to create a road, and the emperor rode across it wearing military or triumphal dress, as if he had conquered the sea itself. The reasons given for this astonishing display vary. One tradition says an astrologer had once claimed Caligula had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. If so, the bridge becomes an answer to prophecy, a theatrical revenge on impossibility. Another explanation sees it as a military-style spectacle, a mock triumph, a performance of command over nature and logistics. Still another sees simple extravagance. A young ruler spending enormous resources to turn a bay into a stage. No single explanation fully accounts for this event, and some details may be exaggerated, but the basic construction of a pontoon bridge is not impossible. Roman engineering and naval organization could create temporary marvels when money, manpower, and imperial will converged. The surprise is that the bridge, for all its madness in memory, also reflects real Roman capacities. This was not fantasy magic. It was administration, labour, ships, timber, anchors, ropes, earth, sailors, soldiers, engineers, and terrified officials turning an emperor's desire into physical fact. That may be the most revealing part. Caligula's power was not only in wanting the impossible, it was in having a state apparatus capable of making the impossible appear, briefly, under his feet. Men had to gather vessels. Crews had to obey. Supplies had to be diverted. The bay had to become an imperial theatre because one man imagined himself riding across it. Seen this way, the Baiae Bridge is not merely a sign of personal vanity. It is a demonstration of how empire transforms whim into landscape. A normal man may boast that he can cross the sea. A ruler like Caligula can command thousands to build the boast. The event must have been visually extraordinary. The blue water crowded with ships, the temporary road laid across their decks, soldiers and attendants lining the route. the emperor glittering in ceremonial dress. The shore packed with spectators, villas watching from the hills, sunlight breaking across waves trapped beneath a road that should not exist. It was ridiculous, magnificent, wasteful, and frightening at once. Both Incitatus and the bridge reveal why Caligula is so difficult to separate from performance. His acts often seem designed to be witnessed, repeated, and misunderstood. He governs through images: a horse treated as nobility, a ruler dressed as a god, senators reduced to props, the sea turned into a roadway. These images may look insane when detached from context, but they also function as political language. They tell Rome that old limits no longer hold. A consulship can be mocked. Nature can be staged. Prophecy can be answered with engineering. The emperor's desire can become a public fact, even when the fact itself is temporary and absurd. And yet the danger of such performance is that it consumes trust. A ruler who uses absurdity as domination leaves everyone uncertain about where reality ends and command begins. Is the horse a joke, a threat, or a policy? Is the bridge a marvel, a military exercise, or a symptom of delusion? The people can watch and wonder. The senators can understand the insult. The administrators can count the cost. But no one can stop the performance while it unfolds. Rome has become an audience trapped inside the emperor's imagination. This is why the strangest myths of Caligula endure. Even if they are exaggerated, they reveal something true about the fear he inspired. People believed such stories because his rule had made them believable. A horse in the place of a consul, a bridge over the sea, a man reaching beyond human measure, these were not random fantasies attached to a normal prince. They were the symbolic remains of a reign in which power became theatre, and theatre became threat. The laughter around Incitatus is uneasy. The wonder at Baiae is edged with dread. Behind both stands the same unsettling lesson: when no one can refuse the emperor, even absurdity can become real for a day. While Rome watches the emperor's spectacles and the Senate measures each insult like a wound, the empire beyond the palace continues to breathe under his name. This is easy to forget because Caligula's memory is so concentrated in the capital, the corridors, the games, the horse, the divine costumes, the bay turned briefly into a road. But the Roman Empire is not only Rome. It is a vast and uneven world of frontier forts, provincial cities, tax districts, client kingdoms, harbours, mining zones, sacred landscapes, military roads, and local elites who must interpret the will of a ruler most of them will never see. An emperor's instability does not remain trapped in marble rooms. It travels outward through letters, appointments, coinage, taxes, troop movements, rumours, statues, and the nervous behaviour of officials trying to guess what the centre now wants. For provincial communities, the emperor is often less a person than a force. His image appears on coins before his voice ever reaches them. His statues stand in forums, temples, military camps, and administrative spaces. His birthday can become a public occasion. His health may be prayed for by people who know him only through titles. A change in his mood can mean a new governor, a new tax pressure, a new religious demand, a new military order, or a shift in favour between rival local families. What survives in the record suggests that Caligula's reign, though short, sent sharp disturbances through several parts of the imperial system. The palace may seem theatrical, but provinces experience theatre as policy when imperial display becomes command. One of the most serious tensions arises in the Eastern Mediterranean, where Roman power rests on a delicate balance of direct rule. Client kings, Greek cities, ancient temples, Jewish communities, and local traditions older than Rome itself. In Alexandria and Judea, imperial cult and local religious identity could become dangerously charged. Caligula's desire for divine honours, whether motivated by belief, arrogance, political theatre, or hostile exaggeration in the sources, had consequences far beyond senatorial pride. The most alarming episode concerns the reported order to place a statue of the emperor in the Jewish temple at Jerusalem. For Rome, statues of the emperor could express loyalty. For Jews committed to the sanctity of the temple and the prohibition against images in that sacred space, such an order threatened catastrophe. The evidence remains incomplete in some details, but the crisis appears to have been real enough to terrify those involved. Publius Petronius, the governor of Syria, was placed in an almost impossible position. To obey quickly risked provoking mass resistance and perhaps revolt. To delay risked imperial anger. Ancient accounts suggest that Jewish delegations pleaded against the statue, and Petronius hesitated, understanding that religious violation could ignite a province more effectively than taxation or military defeat. This is one of the clearest examples of how Caligula's sacred self-image could become a frontier crisis. In Rome, dressing like a god might humiliate senators. In Jerusalem, inserting the emperor's image into the temple could have shaken the foundations of provincial peace. Caligula's assassination prevented the crisis from reaching its worst possible conclusion, but the episode reveals how dangerous symbolic power becomes when it crosses into sacred geography. Elsewhere, Caligula's dealings with client rulers show the same mixture of personal favour, dynastic calculation, and instability. Client kings were essential to Rome's system. They governed border regions, mediated local politics, supplied troops, and projected Roman influence without the full machinery of direct provincial administration. But their status depended on imperial approval. Caligula could elevate, restore, humiliate, or destroy them. He favoured some Eastern princes, including Herod Agrippa, whose fortunes rose dramatically under him. Agrippa's return to prominence is a reminder that Caligula's rule was not experienced everywhere as simple disaster. For certain individuals and factions, his accession opened doors. Imperial instability can ruin one household while enriching another. The empire is too large for any reign to have one meaning. On the military front, Caligula's ambitions turned toward the northern and western edges of Roman power, where the memory of his childhood among the Rhine legions may have carried emotional weight. He travels north, gathers forces, and appears to plan campaigns connected with Germania and perhaps Britain. The British expedition, or what later looked like one, became another source of ridicule in ancient accounts. The most famous story claims that he ordered soldiers to collect seashells on the shore as spoils of the ocean, as if he had conquered the sea rather than an enemy. Like the tale of Incitatus, this anecdote is too perfect to accept without caution. Scholars still debate what actually happened, whether a real invasion was planned and abandoned, whether a mutiny or logistical failure disrupted it, whether the shell-gathering story is hostile mockery, or whether some ritualized act has been misunderstood. Yet the episode matters even through uncertainty. It shows Caligula trying to claim military glory in a world where emperors needed a relationship with conquest, even if actual conquest had become more difficult than Republican memory admitted. Augustus had advised caution, Tiberius had been restrained, but the dynasty's prestige still rested partly on victory, and Caligula was the son of Germanicus, born under the shadow of frontier campaigns, to appear before the army, to move toward Britain. To command the edge of the known Roman world, all of this allowed him to perform the role of war leader. Whether the result was aborted strategy, farce, or propaganda twisted by enemies, no single explanation fully accounts for the surviving stories. What is clear is that even military command could become spectacle under Caligula, and spectacle could become embarrassment when reality refused to obey. The soldiers themselves occupied a complicated place in his rule. They had helped make emperors possible, and the Praetorian Guard in Rome had already learned its political value. Frontier legions, meanwhile, were not decorative. They were hardened institutions with local loyalties, memories, commanders, grievances, and pride. Caligula's childhood nickname had come from soldiers, But an emperor could not rule adult armies through childhood affection alone. He needed pay, discipline, honours, and credible leadership. If his northern expedition disappointed or confused the troops, it may have weakened the aura he had inherited from Germanicus. The army tolerated spectacle best when it came with reward and purpose. Without those, imperial theatre could look dangerously like incompetence. The provinces also felt the financial consequences of extravagance. Money spent in Rome did not remain a Roman problem. Imperial revenue came from across the Mediterranean world: taxes, customs, mines, confiscations, tribute-like payments, and the wealth of local elites tied into the system. When the centre consumed more, pressure could travel outward. Provincial communities might not care about senatorial humiliation in itself, but they cared about governors seeking revenue, legal uncertainty, requisitions, and the costly honour of pleasing a ruler whose tastes kept expanding. The empire's grandeur rested on extraction, and under a lavish emperor the machinery of extraction could tighten. By this point, Caligula's rule has become unstable in more than one direction. In Rome, he frightens the Senate. In the sacred sphere, he unsettles boundaries between man and God. In the financial system, he strains resources. In the provinces, his symbolic demands and military performances create risks that cannot be confined to rumour. The empire still functions. Roads carry messages, governors issue orders, soldiers drill, merchants trade, temples receive offerings, ships cross the sea. But beneath this ordinary movement lies a growing uncertainty about the man whose image binds the system together. A Roman emperor does not need to be everywhere to disturb everywhere. His will travels faster than he does, and under Caligula, that will increasingly feels like weather no one can predict. By the final months of Caligula's reign, fear has begun to change shape. For a long time, fear keeps people obedient. It teaches senators to lower their eyes, courtiers to praise quickly, servants to move silently, and officers to pretend that every command makes sense. But fear cannot remain still forever. If it grows too heavy, it stops preserving power and begins to eat through the floor beneath it. Men who believe they may die no matter how carefully they obey eventually become capable of dangerous thoughts. The palace that once magnified Caligula's will now fills with another invisible force calculation. In guarded corners, behind formal smiles, in the pauses after banquets, people begin to imagine not merely surviving the emperor but removing him. The conspiracy that forms against Caligula is not the clean uprising of a noble republic against a tyrant. Rome rarely gives history such pure shapes. It is a mixture of fear, insult, ambition, self-preservation, and perhaps genuine horror at what the emperor has become. Senators have reason to hate him. Wealthy families have reason to fear confiscation. Exiles and relatives of the dead have reason to dream of revenge. Provincial administrators may worry about impossible commands, but the decisive danger comes from nearer hands. An emperor can survive senatorial hatred if the guards remain loyal. He can survive public gossip if the soldiers protect the doors. He can survive aristocratic contempt if the men with blades still believe their fortunes are tied to his life. Caligula's fatal mistake is allowing resentment to grow inside the armed circle around him. The Praetorian Guard is not merely a bodyguard. It is one of the great political facts of the early empire, stationed near Rome, paid better than ordinary legionaries, close enough to the palace to see weakness, and powerful enough to influence succession. The guard stands between the emperor and the world. Augustus had understood its usefulness. Tiberius's prefect Sejanus had shown how dangerous it could become when concentrated under ambitious leadership. By Caligula's time, everyone knows that imperial power depends not only on law, blood, and popularity, but on the loyalty of these armed men. A ruler who humiliates senators is reckless. A ruler who humiliates guards is inviting the knife closer. At the centre of the plot stands Cassius Chaerea, a tribune of the Praetorian Guard. Ancient sources present him as an older soldier, experienced, perhaps physically marked by service, and repeatedly mocked by Caligula in ways that cut at masculine honour. The emperor is said to have insulted him with obscene watchwords and gestures, treating him as weak or effeminate when he came to receive daily passwords. The details may have been shaped by later storytelling. Because Roman writers often framed assassination as the revenge of injured dignity, still, the core is plausible. In Roman military culture, public insult mattered. Honour was not a decorative feeling. It was tied to authority, discipline, reputation, and the willingness of men to obey. To degrade an officer before others was to damage the very hierarchy that protected the emperor's body. Cheria's grievance alone would not have been enough. Many men are insulted by rulers and do nothing. What makes the moment dangerous is the convergence of resentments. Other guards, palace officials, and senators appear to have known or suspected that action was being planned. Some sources name Cornelius Sabinus, another officer, among the conspirators. Others suggest wider senatorial involvement, though the exact reach of the plot remains uncertain. The evidence remains incomplete, and after an assassination, survivors have powerful reasons to hide, exaggerate, or redirect blame. Some may have encouraged the killing from a safe distance. Some may have learned only when the blades were already drawn. Some may have waited to see who won before discovering their principles. The practical problem is terrifyingly simple. How does one kill a man surrounded by guards? The answer lies in the strange intimacy of palace routine. Absolute rulers appear unreachable from far away, but their daily lives depend on predictable movements. They attend games, sacrifices, performances, baths, meals, councils, and private ceremonies. They pass through corridors and covered walkways. They pause to speak with attendants. They trust familiar uniforms. The more elaborate the palace world becomes, the more it creates small moments when the emperor is both guarded and exposed. Caligula's own confidence may have deepened the danger. A man who has watched senators tremble, crowds cheer, and officials obey absurd commands may begin to mistake obedience for devotion. There is a lesser-known tension in the conspiracy killing Caligula does not automatically solve the problem of empire. It creates another one. Who rules afterward, Rome cannot simply return to the Republic because the Republic is no longer waiting intact beneath the palace floor. The armies are loyal to imperial pay. The provinces are organized around imperial authority. The Senate may dream of restored dignity, but dreams do not command legions. If Caligula dies without a clear replacement, civil conflict could follow. This uncertainty may explain why some men hesitated. To remove a tyrant is one thing. To control the morning after is another. No single explanation fully accounts for the conspirators' motives, because each man may have imagined a different future. Caligula himself seems aware of danger in the general sense, though perhaps not of the exact plot. Ancient accounts describe omens, warnings, uneasy signs, and predictions gathering before his death, as they often do in Roman storytelling. Lightning, dreams, sacrifices, strange accidents. Such details may tell us more about how Romans understood catastrophe than about what actually happened. After a ruler is murdered, memory searches backward for signs. The world, people feel, must have known. The gods must have whispered. The body must have trembled before the blade arrived. Scholars still debate these reports, but they reveal something important about Roman imagination. Assassination was not merely political. It was cosmic disruption, and cosmic disruption demanded omens. Inside the palace, however, the real signs are human. Men who smile too carefully. Officers who know the emperor's route. Senators who avoid asking too much. Servants who sense tension without understanding its shape. Caligula has spent years teaching Rome that human beings can be reduced to props in his theatre of power. Now others begin arranging a scene without him as author. The same system that made his command immediate makes conspiracy possible, because power has narrowed into physical proximity. To change the empire, one must reach the body of the emperor. To reach that body, one must be close, and those closest to him are no longer entirely his. By now, the young man once carried by soldiers as little boots has become a danger even to soldiers. The child adored in the Rhine camps, the survivor of Tiberius's poisoned dynasty, the golden prince welcomed by Rome, the living god of his own imagination, now stands at the center of a shrinking circle. The empire still speaks his name. Coins still carry his face. Statues still show him calm and idealized, as if marble knows nothing of fear. But behind the official image, the living body is vulnerable. A godlike emperor still must walk through corridors. He still must pass men with swords, and in the covered spaces of the palace, where footsteps echo and daylight enters only in narrow angles, the decision hardens. Caligula has made too many people afraid to let him live. The assassination comes not in a battlefield storm, not before the gathered Senate, not beneath the open sky of one of his extravagant spectacles, but in a passageway. That detail matters. Caligula had spent his reign turning power into visibility games, bridges, costumes, divine honours, public humiliations, ceremonies where the emperor's body appeared larger than ordinary life. But the end finds him in a narrower place, where grandeur has no room to expand. A covered corridor is a practical space, built for movement between public and private worlds, between performance and retreat. It is exactly the kind of place where an emperor becomes briefly human again, no longer an image on a coin or a god in costume, but a man walking from one room to another. The date is January 24th in the year 41. Caligula has been attending games connected with the Palatine, and the city is still wrapped in the ordinary noise of public celebration. Crowds gather, performers move through their routines, officials manage ceremonial duties, and the emperor appears as he has appeared so many times before, visible, guarded, dangerous, central. Yet beneath the surface, the conspiracy is already alive. Cassius Chaerea and the others have waited for a moment when access. Confusion and routine will align. Such moments are rare, but palaces create them because even the most protected ruler cannot remain motionless. He must pass from spectacle to meal, from court to bath, from public gaze to inner chamber. Absolute power still has a schedule. Ancient accounts differ in details, as they often do when describing sudden violence, but the basic scene is stark. Caligula leaves the public area and enters a more confined passage. Some say he is approached under the pretense of asking for a watchword. Some place Chaerea at the first blow. Some emphasize the shock, the hesitation, the rush of additional attackers once the irreversible act has begun. The evidence remains incomplete, and later writers shape the scene to fit moral drama. But the essential truth is believable. The emperor's own guards turn their weapons against him. The men responsible for protecting the sacred body of the ruler become the instruments of its destruction. The first strike is more than a wound. It breaks the illusion that had surrounded him. For years, Caligula had tested the limits of obedience. He had made senators tremble, treated wealth as fuel, performed divinity, punished rivals, and turned humiliation into a language of rule. But the body beneath the honours is still flesh. Blades do not care for titles. A man who has been called Lord, Saviour, God, and Caesar can still fall in a corridor if armed men close around him. There is something brutally Roman in this ending. The empire had lifted one man above humanity, then remembered, with steel, that no one truly escapes it. Some ancient versions describe Caligula crying out, struggling, or being struck repeatedly. The number of wounds varies in the tradition, and such numbers often carry symbolic weight after famous killings. But repeated stabbing would fit the emotional nature of the act. Assassination is rarely the clean, single gesture imagined from a distance. It is panic, overkill, bodies crowding too close, fear that the victim might survive, fear that hesitation will doom the attackers, fear that the guards outside the conspiracy will react before the deed is complete. The conspirators must make uncertainty impossible. A wounded emperor is still emperor. A dead one creates a new world. That new world arrives instantly and chaotically. The sacred aura collapses faster than anyone can control. Those nearby scatter, hesitate, or choose sides. Palace servants and guards try to understand whether this is an isolated attack, a wider coup, or the beginning of civil conflict. The news spreads in fragments. As palace news always does, a movement of frightened attendants, a door suddenly guarded, a whisper becoming a shout, faces turning pale before the official announcement exists. Outside, the city has not yet absorbed what has happened. Spectacle continues for a moment under the shadow of a dead performer. Rome is used to blood in the arena, but this blood changes the state. The violence does not stop with Caligula. His wife, Caesonia, is killed, and so is their young daughter, Julia Drusilla. The child's death is one of the bleakest details in the entire story, and it reveals how dynastic politics can turn even infancy into danger. A living child of Caligula could become a symbol, a claim, a future focus of loyalty or revenge. To modern eyes, the murder appears as naked brutality, and it was brutal, to those trapped inside the Roman logic of succession. It may have seemed like the elimination of a future civil war. That is one of the coldest truths of imperial monarchy once bloodline becomes politics. No blood is entirely innocent in the eyes of fearful adults. The Senate, when it learns of Caligula's death, faces a moment it has perhaps imagined but not prepared to master. Some senators may have hoped to restore greater authority to their own order. Some may even have dreamed of reviving republican forms in more than name. But dreams move slowly, and soldiers move quickly. The Praetorian Guard, shaken but decisive, discovers Claudius, Caligula's uncle, reportedly hiding within the palace complex. Claudius had long been underestimated, partly because of physical disabilities or mannerisms that ancient elites mocked, and partly because he had survived by seeming politically harmless. Now harmlessness becomes opportunity. The guard raises him toward power, and the Senate is reminded once again that imperial reality does not wait for senatorial philosophy. This transition is often treated almost comically because of the image of Claudius found behind a curtain, trembling while history changes around him. But beneath the story lies a serious structural lesson. Caligula can be killed, but the monarchy cannot easily be killed with him. The Senate may hate the emperor, but it does not command the armed force necessary to reshape the empire. The guard wants continuity, reward, and a living princeps who can legitimize their position. The people want stability after shock. The provinces need a name on orders and coins. The machinery of empire, once built, demands another body at its center. Caligula's death reveals the fragility of the ruler, but also the durability of the system that produces rulers. No single explanation fully accounts for the assassination. It was personal revenge, political necessity, military resentment, elite desperation, and palace opportunism all at once. Chaerea's insult mattered, senatorial fear mattered, financial pressure mattered, religious disturbance mattered, Caligula's own unpredictability mattered, yet the deeper cause lies in the dangerous intimacy between unlimited power and human vulnerability. The emperor had no ordinary limits while he lived, so the only limit left was murder. Rome had not created a safe way to correct a ruler who became unbearable. It had created ceremonies of obedience, languages of praise, and legal masks for domination. When those failed, men reached for knives. In the covered passage, then, more dies than Caligula. The illusion of sacred invulnerability dies with him. So does the hope that the empire can rely on blood, youth, charisma, or divine theatre to protect itself from the mind of one man. But something survives, and that survival is almost more unsettling. The throne remains. The guards remain. The Senate remains diminished. The people wait for games under a new name. The provinces keep sending revenue. Statues can be removed, faces recut. Inscriptions changed, memories condemned, but the shape of power is still there, waiting to receive another occupant. Caligula falls like a man. The empire continues like a machine. After Caligula's body falls and Claudius rises in the confusion, Rome begins the familiar work of explaining what it has survived. The dead emperor can no longer command, threaten, spend, dress as a god, humiliate senators, or test the obedience of men with swords. But memory is never passive in Rome. It is handled, shaped, punished, rescued, and sometimes weaponized. Statues can be pulled down, images can be altered, names can be avoided, stories can be repeated until they become stronger than stone. Caligula's reign lasts less than 4 years, yet his afterlife stretches across 2,000 years because Rome needed him to mean something. He becomes the mad emperor, the living warning, the proof that unlimited power in a young and damaged man can turn the world into a private theatre of fear. The first problem is the evidence. Much of what survives about Caligula comes from writers who lived after him, wrote under later emperors, or drew on senatorial traditions hostile to his memory. Suetonius gives vivid anecdotes, often arranged to reveal character through scandal. Cassius Dio writes later still. With the advantage of distance and the burden of inherited interpretation, Philo of Alexandria provides a valuable near-contemporary view, especially for the crisis involving Jewish communities and the proposed imperial statue. But his perspective is shaped by his own political and religious concerns. Tacitus's account of Caligula's reign is largely lost, which leaves a silence exactly where one would most want his severe intelligence. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness matters. Caligula may have been monstrous, but the monster we inherit is also a construction. This does not mean he was innocent, misunderstood in some simple sentimental way, or merely the victim of propaganda. Too many independent lines of tradition point toward genuine instability, cruelty, extravagance, and political danger. His execution of rivals, his humiliations of the Senate, his divine pretensions, the crisis in Judea, the fear among guards and courtiers, and the assassination itself all suggest a reign that became intolerable to powerful people around him. What remains uncertain is proportion. How often did theatrical insult become actual policy? How many anecdotes preserve real events? And how many convert rumour into moral lesson? Did illness alter his mind? Or did later writers use illness to make his decline narratively satisfying? Scholars still debate these questions, because no single explanation fully accounts for the man behind the surviving mask. The word madness is especially dangerous. Ancient writers did not diagnose as modern doctors do. They used madness as a moral and political category, a way to describe behaviour that violated restraint, hierarchy, piety, and aristocratic expectation. A ruler who demanded divine honours could be called mad. A ruler who mocked senators could be called mad. A ruler who spent too much, loved spectacle too intensely, or exposed the emptiness of republican forms could be called mad. Some of Caligula's behaviour may indeed point towards psychological disturbance, perhaps worsened by illness, trauma, isolation, and the deforming effects of absolute power. But to reduce everything to private insanity is too easy. It lets Rome itself escape judgment. For Rome had built the conditions that made Caligula possible. It had preserved the language of liberty while concentrating power in one household. It had taught emperors to accept honours close to worship, then acted shocked when one ruler took the sacred performance too literally. It had allowed the Senate to become dependent while still pretending it was dignified. It had made soldiers the makers and breakers of rulers. It had turned family blood into political destiny, ensuring that children, sisters, cousins, and infants could become threats before they became full human beings. Caligula's reign is extreme, but it is not an alien object dropped into Roman history. It grows from Roman soil. His legacy also survives because he reveals the horror of exposure. Augustus had hidden monarchy under moderation. Tiberius had hidden fear under distance and procedure. Caligula tears away the fabric. He shows senators that their offices can be mocked, that a horse joke can wound because the office is already hollow. He shows the people that spectacle can become a substitute for trust. He shows the provinces that an emperor's symbolic obsession can threaten sacred order hundreds of miles away. He shows the guards that they are not merely protectors but potential kingmakers, and he shows later generations that an empire can be sophisticated, lawful, wealthy, artistic, and administratively brilliant while still being dangerously dependent on the mind of one ruler. There is a strange tragedy in the distance between the child and the memory. The boy in little boots, adored by soldiers on the Rhine, did not begin as a symbol of madness. He began as a child inside a family already too useful to politics. He lost his father, his mother, his brothers, and any ordinary trust in the world before he ever ruled it. None of that excuses what followed. Many wounded people do not become tyrants, but it helps explain why the story feels darker than simple villainy. Caligula is both actor and symptom, both perpetrator and product. The empire wounds him, then hands him the power to wound others. After him, Rome does not abandon emperors. Claudius rules. Nero comes later. The pattern continues: brilliance, fear, reform, cruelty, spectacle, conspiracy, memory. Caligula becomes the first great imperial nightmare not because no ruler before him had been ruthless, but because his reign seems to reveal the new system stripped of elegance. The Republic is gone, though its words remain. The emperor is human, though his honours deny it. The Senate is ancient, though its power is broken. The people cheer, though cheers cannot govern. The guards protect, until they do not. And so Caligula remains suspended between history and warning. The surviving record may exaggerate him, but it did not invent the danger he represents. His life asks what happens when a society gives one person the authority of law, the wealth of nations, the obedience of armies, the language of divinity, and no reliable human limit. Rome answered that question in blood, first in the palace corridors, then again and again across imperial history. Caligula died young, but the shadow he cast was older than he was. It belonged to power itself. In the end, the city continues. Dawn comes over Rome as it always does, touching the temple roofs, the crowded apartment blocks, the wet stones near the river, the silent walls of the palace where servants have already begun learning a new master's habits. The Tiber carries refuse, offerings, ashes, and reflected light toward the sea. Markets open, smoke rises from ovens, senators dress carefully, guards stand at their posts. Somewhere, a statue's face is altered, a name is scraped away. A household decides which memories are now safe to speak aloud. Caligula becomes a story, and stories are another kind of empire. They cross centuries more easily than armies cross rivers. They survive in manuscripts, in lectures, in paintings, in films, in the private imagination of anyone who's ever wondered how far a human being can fall when no one dares to correct him. Yet beneath the famous madness, beneath the horse, the bridge, the costumes, the cruelty, there remains the more unsettling shape of the world that held him, a child made into a symbol, a family destroyed by suspicion, a city desperate for renewal, a throne too high for any wounded soul to sit on safely. Time softens marble, but it does not always soften warnings. The Roman Empire could build roads through mountains, carry water across valleys, raise cities from provincial dust, and make distant peoples speak the language of its law. But it could not solve the danger at its centre that the fate of millions might bend around the fears, appetites, illnesses, and fantasies of one person. Caligula's life is brief, almost shockingly brief, but it opens a crack through which the whole imperial structure can be seen. And now, after the shouting fades, after the blades are cleaned, after the Senate votes and the guards bargain and the next emperor steps into the light, the image that lingers is quieter. Not the mad ruler on a stage, not the horse in purple, not the bridge across the glittering bay, but a corridor in the palace, suddenly narrow, suddenly human, a place between rooms, a place where the god emperor has nowhere left to rise, and history, waiting in the shadows, reaches out its hand.